It is so good to have you with us. It is another episode of Unfiltered coming your way right here and now. Officially go down as episode number 298. Your scorecard, you can jump on board 24/7, Unfiltered Revolution, Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts, on X at Casey Stern or Twitter, if you still call it that. And of course, YouTube and on Instagram at Unfiltered with Casey Stern. You find him on MLB.com and as well on MLB Network. He is the great Mark Feinsand. Hello, sir, but just Feinsand because there's only one, on Twitter or X, if you will. You still hold
Just
that
one.
down by yourself, sir. How are you? How's everything?
I'm doing well. How you doing?
How are things? Good, man. I'm doing well.
Everything
I'm
is
doing
great.
well. Obviously,
Everything is great.
another baseball season with tons of overreactions, and I want to get into some of those and get your thoughts on all of it. In addition to talking about John Sterling, I do always let people know we're presented as always by our good friends at Bet Online, your number one source for all your sports betting needs, latest lines, odds, and matchup reports, baseball, basketball, boxing, golf, and more. Fastest and easiest way to get your wagers, live betting, and favorite casino and card games. They're all available right now from your phone. Get to the website or mobile device. Use the code BELIEVE. It's BLEAV. You'll get a 50% bonus on your first deposit. Bet online where the game starts. And let me start with John Sterling. You got a chance, obviously, to befriend him over the years, and during those daily news fifth innings over the years, spend time with him and Susan. So you saw him kind of from the work side as well. What was your reaction when you heard about his kind of sudden, certainly, retirement, despite the fact that he's been doing this for so long, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, my first reaction was, I hope he's okay. I hope his health is well. Obviously, when this happens abruptly the way it did, you start, your mind starts to churn in terms of, this seems like a decision he would have made at the beginning of a season or at the end of a season, not in the middle of April. But immediately, I started hearkening back to all those daily news fifths that I did. I think I did 8 years in the booth with them, where I did, the visiting half of the fifth inning in the booth every game that I worked, and it was one of the great joys of my career. I mean, as somebody who grew up in New York, and John started broadcasting the Yankees when I was, I think, 14 years old. So, for my teenage years, all through college and into my adult life, he's been the voice of Yankee baseball for me, and sort of that soundtrack to the summer. I mean, back in the days when I was a teenager, I'd be walking around with my Walkman, listening if they had a day game walking home from school. And it was John Sterling's voice that you were hearing. So, having a chance to have been in the booth with him literally hundreds of times, I never took it for granted. It was always a great thrill. Uh, you sort of developed the rhythm for being in the booth with John. You watch the game, he'd ask you a question, or Susan would ask me a question, and I'd start answering it. And if I saw the pitcher start that windup, you just stop talking, because you're not stepping on John's act. John's got to call that pitch, and you just get out of the way. But I think the thing that was always fascinating to me as the years went on, when I was covering the Yankees, I covered them 01 to 16, and at the beginning, the Burn Baby Burn and the Georgie Juiced one, those were sort of every player didn't have their own home run call. There were a few that he really loved. And all of a sudden, I think he realized, it clicked with him. People like this. I'm going to do one for every player. And I remember year two of me covering the Yankees, they signed Giambi, and he broke out the Giambino, and everybody loved that. And it was sort of like, okay, he's going to do one of these for every single player. And when new players would come to the Yankees, you'd hear them talking to each other and say, before they hit a home run, I wonder what Sterling's call is going to be for me. And the fact that the players were aware of it, I thought was something that he got a kick out of, and certainly they got a kick out of it as well.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, just to kind of follow up on John, was, and I got to meet him a few times, and even only in passing, but we often say about athletes when they retire and they fit this category: better person, better teammate than they were a player. He seems like the guy, Mark, that was a much better even person than he was a broadcaster. And I should reference, because there's an Islander logo in the background, you and I are fans of that team since way before his time with the Yankees. But just what about the person John Sterling should people know who only know the voice if they're a Yankee fan?
John would always ask how my kids were doing, how my wife was doing. He cared about people, and he loved people. He loved talking to people. And, I think there's a part of John that he understands why he's well known. He understands what he is. But anybody who crossed paths with him, he he was interested in, oh, where are you from? Or how long have you been covering baseball? What team did you root for growing up? And that kind of thing. And I say this with as much love and admiration as I can. He was kind of like your crazy uncle, where he would just say things and you'd be like, God, only John can get away with saying that. But it always came off with such love and respect that you just sort of shook your head and laughed and said, "That's John." He was a great man, great friend. I'm honored and privileged to have had the chance to work with him, and even more to get to know him and be able to call him a friend. And he will be missed. The one thing I will point out, and I know all of the Yankee haters out there, and I'm sure there are plenty of them who listen to this podcast, um, think he's the biggest homer in the world. Now, look, a lot of radio guys are homers. They root for their teams. They want their teams to win. It's better for business. It's more fun to call wins than losses. The one thing I always appreciated about John, it was always very clear he wanted the Yankees to win. He never once in his entire career used the word we. And I think there are so many local broadcasters in all sports who openly root for the team and say, oh, we need a hit here. John understood his place. He was not a member of the Yankees. He was a member of the Yankees family, and he was certainly a big part of the organization. But he understood that he was there to do a job. He wasn't the one at bat. He wasn't the one throwing the pitch. He never used the word we once. And I think there's something to be said for that. No matter how much he wanted them to win, it was them, not we.
Yeah, and that's a huge point. And obviously, we hope first and foremost his health and that he enjoys retirement and indelible in terms of the voice and the impact, which is something that all kids look for is to have impact on the game moving forward. And for broadcasters, it's way tougher. And he's certainly in the category who will have that, like the Vin Scullys and others that certainly are certified as those voices for us growing up. Let's be fair and easily segue into the Yankees. Are you? I was saying to you about this. I'll put it this way before we got started. In all the years covering the Yankees, you covered them when they had that mojo, and they seem to have it for years and years. And it's been a while. It's been questions, it's been concerns, it's been disappointments, it's been they're not good enough. I know it's early in the season. I, I know they have how much of that is Juan Soto and D that even though it's an early start, there are things that you could look at and say, hey, look, this looks like a different version of the Yankees so far.
I think Juan Soto has a lot to do with it. He certainly brings a swagger that few other players can bring. A lot of people have swagger, but can't necessarily back it up with their performance on the field. Juan Soto is doing every bit of that. As we sit here right now, 19 games, well, he's hitting 352. He's got 4 homers, 17 RBIs. His OPS is over 1,000. I mean, he's doing everything they could have hoped for. The reason I think we look at the Yankees over the last 10 to 12, maybe 15 years and say they don't have that same mojo. It's because they haven't won, right? Mojo is a result of winning. The reason that all those years during the Jeter Rivera years that they had that mojo is because people looked at them and knew that this team had accomplished something many times. Even the '09 team, the Sabathias and Teixeiras, they came in and they won right away. And so there was that mojo there. They're a long way removed from anybody who's been a part of any of those teams. So the guys they have now don't have that winning history, which I think is important with the mojo. I'm a little surprised they're off to this start. When Cole got hurt, you sort of said he was one of the 2 guys that was kind of irreplaceable on that team. Everybody said, well, who's going to take that spot? Well, nobody's going to take that spot. Nobody's going to be Garrett Cole. And even with Cole, I thought the X factors for this team, they needed 2 of Stroman, Cortez, and Rodon to be good. And to this point, Stroman has been excellent. He's looking like the guy from the first half of last year who made the All-Star team. Rodon has looked much more like the guy that the Yankees thought they were signing for 160 plus million, unlike last season. And Cortez has been good for the most part. So the fact that the 3 of them, and then you throw in Clark Schmidt and Luis Heel having good starts, the pitching staff, we know this team's going to hit. The question was, will they pitch enough? And to this point, they are. And that's even without Anthony Rizzo doing anything at the plate. Gleyber Torres has had an awful start. Oswaldo Cabrera has been a huge revelation for them. I don't think this is something that's going to carry for the season, but if he can fill that void while DJ LeMahieu's out, but obviously this team's going to go as far as Judge, Soto, and Stanton can carry them, and then you throw in Volpe, who's obviously gotten off to a nice start. Soto and Stanton have been excellent. Judge is starting to come around. And I think if the pitching can hold up, then I think this team's got a chance to make some real noise this year, especially if they're going to get
Yeah,
Cole back.
yeah, right. Yeah, I was just going to say, and a lot of this is predicated on Garrett Cole. I've been saying here on the podcast that before the season, I looked at this like, well, if Garrett Cole is healthy and he needs to get healthy, the Yankees are definitely a playoff contender. It looks like now, if he's healthy, they could be as good as anybody in the American League. And that's saying something. You know, the pitching injury is obviously not just stuck, unfortunately, to just Garrett Cole. I mean, the names have just continued to list on and on and on. When you think of the Strider and the Biebers at the helm of that here so far this year, and I'm not asking you to play doctor. What I am going to ask you is, are you surprised that
That's good.
so many people want to? Well, if yeah, it's Dr. Feinsand. Are you surprised that so many people are trying to pigeonhole this to one thing? You've got a certain segment of people who want to say it's the pitch clock. Major League Baseball wants to poo-poo that can't happen, even though, to be fair, Garrett Cole, I think, had the smartest statement on this, Mark, saying we don't have enough data for that. We can't just dismiss anything. What's been kind of the talk around the league as these things mounted here over the last couple of months?
Well, if this had all of a sudden come out of nowhere in the past 18 months, then I think you could have a better case of pointing at the pitch clock. But this is something that's been escalating for the past 10, 15 years. If you look at, sort of the graph of Tommy John surgeries in this league since 2010, it's a steady climb up. I mean, it's more than two times the number of what it was 10, 15 years ago. So the pitch clock's only been, sorry about that, the pitch clock's only been in effect for a year and a month. So I'm not saying the pitch clock won't ultimately be something that you can point at 10 years from now and say, look, it kept you going up even further. But I don't think you can make that statement now. I keep, every time anybody's asked me about this, I point back to a book written by my buddy Jeff Passan called The Arm. And I hate giving Passan credit for anything because it just swells his head. But he wrote this book looking at the epidemic of Tommy John surgeries and arm injuries in the league over the past decade or two. I think this all goes back way before the big leagues, way before the minor leagues. This goes back before college, before high school. This is a problem that starts out with youth baseball. And, young pitchers, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, just being abused to the point of, throwing numbers of pitches at those ages that they shouldn't be throwing, because either the parents are pushing them or the coaches are pushing them or a combination of both, or the kid is pushing himself to the point where the parent or the coach needs to step in and they're not. And I think when you hear more and more about, 40, 50% of the Tommy John surgeries in this country are being performed on teenagers, that's alarming. And the number of guys that you're now hearing about in the big leagues who are undergoing their second Tommy John surgery at age 24, that's alarming. And I think, unfortunately for Major League Baseball, it's really impossible for the league to get a grip on this part of it because they have no authority over what a 12-year-old, if a 12-year-old is being taught to throw curveballs at an age where they probably shouldn't be throwing a lot of curveballs, or, like they see what's happening in college and in the big leagues or professional baseball, and they're just starting to chase velocity from a young age. Chasing velocity has become the phrase du jour in this, but I really think it's accurate. If you're out there throwing max effort all the time uh, from a young age, your elbow's going to blow out. That's just the way this works. Elbows are not meant to throw max velocity all the time for years and years and years and stay healthy.
Yeah, I'm with you on this, and I think that one of the things that I've said is the key word is maximize. Everything's about maximizing effort, maximizing velocity, maximize torque. These are not machines; they're humans. These elbows are not supposed to and meant to go this way, and to be doing this at this high speeds and everything with Shane Bieber specifically. And you look at the way he performed when he got out of the gates. Mark 20 strikeouts, his first two starts was his tick or two up in velocity, and that's all everybody wanted to focus on. Always, he's got a tick or two extra in the velocity. Well, what what comes with that? What's the sacrifice that comes the other? It's kind of my follow-up to you is, we've talked a lot about over the years, we can go from the jerseys all the way to the ball and a million things in between, the A's situation, a lack of accountability at times from Major League Baseball in certain aspects of things. And without getting into all of those that have occurred, I will ask you, were you taken back or surprised at all by the comments that the league seemed to make, dismissing that it was the pitch clock because it's new, is almost to defend it? Because I'm with you. You can't say it is, because this has been ramped up for so long. But you also, I don't think, can say it's not. To Cole's point of not dismissing, where does the league think stand in the necessity of figuring all this out, quote unquote, here as we go on moving forward?
Well, I think the lack of data is why it's easy to dismiss it right now, because I don't think you can point at the pitch clock and say this is why these injuries are happening. Because okay, then why did 200 plus pitchers have Tommy John surgery in 2022 when there was no pitch clock? I feel like dismissing it right now, I don't think that's out of line, because you can't, I don't think you can point to the pitch clock and say that's why this is happening when it's been happening at a rapid escalation for the past 10, 15 years. Now, if it continues to go up or it jumps further and that percentage continues to increase 5 years from now, well, then you'll have 6 years of pitch clock data. And at that point, you can go back and say, well, maybe this was part of it. But I think to blame it on the pitch clock right now is way too premature. And so I don't think you can point at the pitch clock right now and say this is the reason these things are happening. So I didn't really have an issue with MLB coming out and saying what it said.
We talk about pitchers. It's hard not to. And as we're doing this and taping this, Jack Leiter will make his first big league start. Obviously, I mean, who doesn't love Al, first of all, as a human, as a person? Happy for him and what this must be for him to see his son get to this level, a number 2 overall pick. And then when you say get to this level, it seems like, oh, well, that shouldn't be a surprise. But he had the high walk rate. He had some issues for the first couple of years in Double-A. And then he went into this development list, and the Rangers worked with him, and he comes out the other side, and the strikeouts are up and the walks are down. And he's coming in at like a perfect time where obviously his confidence has been boosted. Just how great is this story of, because it's not as simple, Mark, as a guy who was drafted high who then gets to the big leagues. There's a lot that's been in between since he was picked number 2.
Yeah, I see Al around MLB Network occasionally, and I always ask him how Jack's doing, and Al's brutally honest, like he is with everything else, and he said he's got to work on this. He's having struggles with this. He'll get there, but it's going to take some work and some time. And to see him put in that work and time and have the results pay off the way they have has been great. And second generation big league players, I think the part of the game that comes naturally to them is the all the stuff off the field, because they've been around big league life. Nothing that's gonna, and they've also got sort of a conciliary in their father who can answer questions the way that fathers who weren't in the big leagues or didn't play professional baseball can't do. So that kind of thing, the whole adapting to the major league life, I think, is the easy part for a player. Going out there and having to, strike out Mike Trout is the difficult part. And so when you're struggling in the minors, this is probably a kid who dominated throughout high school and went to college and dominated there and really hasn't come into these, faced these kinds of struggles. And so when you see a young kid drafted as high as Jack was struggle out of the gate in the minors, well, that can go one of two ways. Either you can say, yikes, this is much harder than I thought, and I don't know if I have it, and it hurts your confidence. Or you can say, okay, I've identified these things, my coaches have identified these things, and I need to work on them and get better at them. And he has. And obviously, it's only a small sample size with 3 games in the minors this year. But when you see him in 14 innings go, 25 strikeouts and 3 walks, clearly some of the issues that he was facing in his first 2 years of professional ball, he's at least temporarily put a halt to those. And it'll be interesting to see how he comes out and performs in the big leagues now.
And a great drop. You're making me remind. I got to write myself a note now to watch Analyze This, which I haven't seen in like forever, with the drop of the Consigliere, which is just such a fantastic flick for those who have not seen it. And it's great. Speaking of great, I mentioned the Islander logo. I got to get here before we get out. I know you and I, and you've been swamped and busy the last 3 months. So maybe you have not had as much depression as I've lived in this moment. Patrick Waugh comes in. He's going to save the day. They get off to a great start. Then they are terrible for weeks. Then all of a sudden they wake up and are fantastic. And here we go again. You and I have lived this. And speaking of which, it's the Hurricanes again, who clearly they're outmatched by. What chances do you give our hockey team to win this first round series?
Oh, they're going to win this series. They're going to win this series, and I say that as a completely partisan Islanders fan. I can't get against
Really?
them. Come on. Look, do I believe it? I don't know, but they got a chance. I've seen the underdog win many series in my lifetimes. I watched the Islanders eliminate the Pittsburgh Penguins in 1993 when they had no business being on the ice with them. So I will
David
just,
Volek.
from a complete
Yes.
fanboy, from a complete fanboy stance, I will say they're going to win the series just because I want them to win the series. But uh, ultimately, even if they get past Carolina, I don't see this being a team that's going to be able to go make a huge run. But we've seen them make huge runs before when they had no business making huge runs. So I will hope for the best or prepare for the worst.
And we have Patrick Waugh, so at least there seems to be some hope moving forward. So we'll take. Appreciate you. We will do this again soon.
Well, it's interesting, Casey. I will
FeindsandGetHim@MLB.com.
tell
Of
you,
course, you could jump on board Twitter X. Yes, yeah.
my favorite
Go
non-Islander
ahead.
of all time was Patrick Waugh. So when they named him the coach, I was like, well, maybe this is a little
Really?
magic here. You know, I love Patrick Waugh. Huge fan. I played goalie in a roller hockey league in high school, and I had a red Canadians 33 jersey that I wore every weekend when I played. I'm a huge Waugh fan. So I was very excited just for the idea that my favorite non-Islander was now an Islander.
I love that. I love it. Well, hopefully, if you're right, we'll have. I mean, I'm going to have you on again, just even if it's like a minute long podcast before the next series to pick them again. But we'll see. You can get him at Feinsand, of course, on Twitter or X. Will and find him at MLB.com and on MLB Network and find Unfiltered everywhere you can find it everywhere else. And we'll see you next time on Unfiltered. It's always presented by our good friends at Bet Online.